welcome to Jamora Land. Before we start, can we just have a minute of silence because one of our family members has passed away here? And I'd just like to have a minute of silence if you don't mind. Thank you.
Is that okay, Mel?
Yes.
Thank you. Can you time Mel, please?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Judy? No, it's fine. Yeah, Mel, is there the aunties, what's happened? They, we've finished with our welcome. So would you like us to go into?
Oh, thank you, aunties. Thank you very much for that welcome, and we send our respects to your family in your sad time.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
So welcome everybody to the New South Wales NCC Online Water Forum. Just an introduction, my name's Mel Gray. I'm running the water campaign for the New South Wales Nature Conservation Council. With me, I've got Kelly from Dubbo, who's helping me out. We've got Jackie from NCC, who's helping us out. And we've also got our other Jackie, our CEO, Jackie Mumford's with us as well. I'll quickly just let you see the panel who we've got on tonight, fully packed panel. We've got Professor Richard Kingsford. We've got Tony Windsor. Don't know if everyone can see all these people. Stuart Kahn. And we've also, somewhere in there, should have Elizabeth Farrelly. Are you with us, Elizabeth? And Kate Fairman, but I haven't seen, but I have seen Rose. Thank you, Rose. And we've got some apologies too as well tonight. So we've got apologies from the member for Barwon, Roy Butler, the member for Dubbo and the New South Wales Ag Minister, Dougal Saunders, from the New South Wales Water Minister and member for Tamworth, Kevin Anderson, and the New South Wales Environment Minister, James Griffin. So for over 65 years, the Nature Conservation Council has been the voice for nature in New South Wales. We've been campaigning to protect nature and for a safe climate. NCC currently has over 180 member groups with whom we collaborate and support to take impactful action to strengthen the movement. The NCC has a strong history of non-partisan political campaigning. We're here for the issues, not the politicians, the parties, or the ideologies. This allows us to constructively work with all parties and candidates to pull focus onto nature and a safer climate. Tonight, the issue is water in inland New South Wales. For all its faults, the Murray-Darling Basin Plan is a world-first attempt at managing a rambling, complex, interconnected river basin as one connected whole. The challenge is that state borders carve up the basin. And within those borders, even the river valleys are broken up even further into little patches. And every one of those patches within a river valley has historically been managed as a separate source of water. Now, this must change, and time is of the essence. In a healthy basin, water flows down rivers and it idles through wetlands and lakes. Rivers can break their banks and be nourished by their floodplains. Water can seep into the ground and then bubble up again through springs. And it evaporates into the sky to fall back down as rain. This beautiful complex basin will look after us, but we've got to look after it as one connected whole system. And it's big. This is what we're talking about, this whole basin as one big connected complex whole. So for tonight, we're not taking any questions from the audience in the chat, but if you do have any questions from tonight, then we do have the Water Minister's email address. I'm sure he's sorry he is sorry that he couldn't be here, but I'm sure that he'd appreciate hearing your concerns and having the opportunity to answer your questions. So we'll be popping his email address in the chat for you to have so you can send your questions to Minister Anderson. So please stay on mute. Our connection seems to be pretty stable, but if it gets a bit wonky, then turning your camera off will probably help everybody's connections. The forum is being recorded, and if people aren't being respectful and kind in the chat, then we will move people on. So the theme of tonight is, like I said, interconnected basin. And I'll hand over to the aunties there in Moree to talk about how rivers being connected and people being connected is so important and what that means. Thanks, aunties.
Yum, everyone. What we'll be starting with is my aunties talking about their living on the riverbank, the MEI, and also, talking about the trawl and things like that. So, Aunt, whoever would like to go first? Which one? You first.
Okay. My name is Judy. I think I know you, Tony. And a couple of others. And I grew up on the mission years ago in a tent. We had one tap that supposed to have served everybody on that place, and there was quite a few of us there on Marlene.
Yeah.
And we weren't allowed anywhere near the springs that were going on because the council here wouldn't allow it. We were cut off from it, even the pool. And I'm 80 years old now, and I've never been in that pool in my life. I had no intention to walk in there because we weren't allowed in there. And were you in there?
No, really was.
You went in there once. And now it's like a big white elephant now, isn't it? Hardly anyone uses it because it's got too expensive, and they've drained all the water out of the river and everywhere else. And
Well, we used to swim.
yeah, where I used to live, it was right on the bank of the MEI, and we had to just fall out of our door and we were in the river. And
What's it like now, Auntie?
full of rubbish and everything else, isn't it? And it's
Hardly any water in it.
hardly any water. Because it's the MEI and it runs off, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it runs off the Guida and another place, another river. But it used to come up where we lived was right on the bank, and we didn't have to go to the bank to look at the river. We can just look out the window and we'd see the floodwaters, and they'd be up that high. But it never broke the bank. And it was one of the highest places in Moree. And we were all safe, but the rest of the town wasn't. And that was in the 50s, I think, wasn't it? And I was only young then,
Yeah.
but you still remember it.
And the irrigation pump, when they brought that in, that's when it changed, didn't it?
Well, they decided they'd build a pool there, and that took a lot of our natural water. And they just let that, the manager, we had a white manager there and we weren't allowed in it at certain times because his kids had to have access to it and it wasn't meant for them. And that caused a lot of animosity. And I don't think any of you know. These two would know my mother, but she was a very strong woman and she fought tooth and nail with anyone that come there and wanted to listen. But
So-
she never shut up.
Yeah, so what Aunt's talking about is the pool in Moree, as you all know, that we weren't allowed into the local pool. And so they built one down the mission and that took a lot of the fresh water away from, you know,
But
drinking.
they never built it. Our men built that.
Yeah, the men built that
They come in
for
and built
ration,
it,
for ration.
and they did all the labour on it. And it's still there at the moment, but I think it's in a bad state.
Yeah,
I don't go down there no more.
When they cut the water off from there,
Yeah.
they cut out the water off.
they cut the water off
We
down
had
at
our
the
own
mission.
water, down the mission. And they cut that off.
It was like a spring, but we had
Never
a,
ended.
we had a
Yeah.
couple of people in there that sold to the council and they took it off us. So I won't mention any names, otherwise I'll end up in court. So that's it.
You'll be right, Aunt.
No, I can't open my mouth yet. But I might write it in my memoirs before I die.
No, Auntie, you'll be right, you'll be right. You got Tony there, you can say something.
Oh, Anne-Marie said to say hello to you, by the way.
Who?
Tony Wynn.
Tony.
Yeah. And Aunt, you want to talk about your,
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a little thing written out here. Yeah, my name's Marlene Wirabone. I'm a descendant of the first Aboriginal man that lived in Moree. And his name was Currajon Joe. Now, in his tribe, that was king of the water. He went where he camped where water was. The first camp he had when he came to Moree was Mary Brown Park. I don't know if it was a Kinnard or a Barker. From there, he moved to the golf course. Always with water. He always lived near water. So then from there, he moved to what they call the middle camp. Well, they were the best days of my life. I was about 9 or 10 then. And we used to swim, we had a lot of water, we had corals, we had a board ride running through where we lived in the Kinnards. And there was a lot of families there, Aboriginal families living there. And we had the Mio River running off it. So we had fish, swim, corals. That was the best days of our life. There was water everywhere. And from there, we moved down to the Mio Mission. Then we had water there. I think I was 10 when we had the first biggest flood in Moree. I think it was 1955. I was 10 years old. And there was water everywhere. I remember jumping off my grandfather's steps and diving in the river, you know, in the flood water, swimming, all of the kids. And that was a lot of water back then. And then anyway, then as the years went on, of course, we weren't allowed in the pool. We swam in the river before we got our swimming pool. We swam in the river, and it was a good river. We had plenty of water to swim with, you know, that's what we done. We weren't allowed to go anywhere else, so we swam. We had our river there.
Clean then too.
Yeah, and then I noticed that in the 1970s, I think it was, when the cotton started, I noticed our river, the water was disappearing. Like we used to go fishing and swimming and still then, and crawl up and still then. You know, we still had our little board rains. And then they started going. The little board rains we used to go and get the crowbars, and the river started going, the water started going. And we were wondering where all this water was going to, you know, because water don't just disappear like that out of a big river, you know. And that was there nearly all my life. The Mei River had plenty of water in it. Then from there we moved out to the common, and then from there, that was in the 70s, we had to carry our water. We had no taps over there. We used to have to carry our water. When my husband was working, I used to have to carry it with the yoke. They had the yoke across my back with 2 buckets to carry the water, drinking water. And I was getting that from down the treatment works. And I used to have to boil that water before we can drink it. Because we had no taps there where we lived. And so, you know, the cotton done a lot of damage to our waterways. The cotton and a lot of other things that's grown is taken all our water. And, you know, every living thing needs water. And if we don't stop now, stop the greedy people from doing what they're doing to our water, what's going to happen to our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren? We're all going to die because greedy people jump in the plane and go overseas and drink all the water they want. But us poor people, we're going to stay here and die, you know, and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. It's got to stop. We're going to stop these greedy people from taking a life. We can't live without water. Nobody can. And on top of that, now we've got the bloody
Mining.
mining coming in. And they're finishing the job for the cotton poles. They're taking all our water. They're poisoning our water, you know? I mean, it's got to stop.
We need help.
And you know, it's got to stop because without water, we're all going to die. Only the greedy people are going to live, put it that way. They're going to jump in their planes and go overseas with their plenty of water. We're going to be left in to die. That's it. We can't live without water.
Well, not if we got anything to do with it, Auntie. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, what Marlene's saying, a lot of that happened when the cotton fields came in.
Yeah, in
When they
1970.
brought their cotton in here,
Yeah,
that was the downfall.
when they brought that cotton in here, that was in the, what year was that?
I can't remember.
1981. When they brought the cotton in here, that's when I noticed that our Mio
The fish.
hardly had any water in it.
Everything started disappearing.
The water was just going.
And not only the fish that were dying, you were out there in the cotton fields and you were being sprayed, you know.
And
It's a wonder a lot of us never died from it.
we lost a lot of people from cancer when we used to work out on the cotton field. They come over and spray us.
Yeah. In planes and.
And it's still in our waterways too, you know, it runs into our waterways, the poison of all these places. We all know that, you know, and straight in, they've been poisoning our waterways since they arrived here, but yeah, we know what the irrigators and the cotton and that's been doing to us, but the aunties have really suffered. You know, through.
We've always had, our river was always full of water. That was where we lived. We swam, we, you know, crawled, we fished. That was that's our enjoyment.
That was our life.
We had no other way. You know, we didn't go anywhere. We weren't allowed to go anywhere. We were barred from this and we were barred from that. And we were barred from this. And yeah, we only had our river.
That's it. There was a lot of racism around at that time.
Oh,
We even had our own ward in the hospital, had down the back where nobody could see us. So, and the only time they took us over to where all the white people were was if we were to have an operation, something. And then they'd be taken back and shoved in the corner, like little Jack Horner, you know, no one could see us. But
That's the first for me that we had our own water in the hospital. Wow, lucky I was a baby.
you were born in a tent. So,
Master, you were born in the tent, eh?
Uh,
Yes. No.
mm,
sorry about all the disrespect that has happened and is still happening. And it's really heartbreaking when, you know, we're reminded that we will die without water. So thank you for that story. And we will all die without water, and our country out here west of the Great Divide will become uninhabitable without healthy rivers. And we knew that after uncapped irrigation until the mid-90s. And then the millennial drought came and things got really bad, and there was a plan made, Tony. Now, it might not have been the best plan. It might not have ended up as the best plan, but it is a world first attempt to manage this really huge, complex system as one connected whole. But there's been some resistance. There was resistance early, and you were right in the thick of it. Are you able to come off mute, Tony, and tell us about that early resistance to the basin plan?
Still, please.
Hey, Miles, get back on.
Mel, I just want to, Auntie,
If we go
just want to let you know we've got a big storm coming in, Maureen. I think the ancestors are listening to us. So if we go off, that's what's happened.
you know.
Okay.
We'll be still here.
They listen to what we say.
Stay safe. Okay, Tony, they're going to listen to you now. Yeah, you'll have to take yourself off mute.
How's that? Can you hear me?
Very well.
Okay, well, if I could just pay my respects to elders past and present, and particularly to the three ladies there today. Good day to all of you, and I wish you well, and I'm sorry about the sorry business that you're enduring at the moment. I guess my role on this forum is to look at the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and for 100 years, various states and the Commonwealth, and I guess we'd all understand that the Murray-Darling system is made up of 26 catchments and covers parts of Queensland, parts of New South Wales, Victoria, and South Australia and the ACT. So it embraces 5 different governments, and as well as the Commonwealth government itself. So for a plan to work, it had to be agreed to by all of those players. Now, as Mel said, it's not a perfect plan, and it was a compromise. And I'll probably spend a little bit of time on that compromise part of it, but it was a compromise. And that was strictly because of political reasons. I chaired a committee that looked at this. It was a multi-party committee that I think we had about 12 months looking at it, and there are various recommendations made to the Parliament, and then the Parliament itself. I'm not saying they adopted all of our recommendations, but they actually put the plan in process. And even though people didn't talk about it at the time, there were compromises made. Climate change, for instance, wasn't factored into the plan itself. What would be the impact of climate change on the inflows, the evaporation rates, the whole box and dice of what happens with water when it runs downhill. So that was part of the compromise. I don't think the Indigenous management issues and the issues of Indigenous people were considered well enough. There was time spent in various areas looking at those things, and I think just the recent floods that we've had in the Darling system particularly indicate that some of the advice from Indigenous people needs to be taken on board, not only in relation to this issue, but land management in a dry country generally. So the plan came into place, and since then, there's been one particular additive, and I won't get into the detail, but those who are right into water would know that 450 gigalitres of water was added to the plan, and there's still some debate going on in relation how all of that is contained in the plan itself. since then, we've seen, particularly New South Wales, not doing the right thing by the balance of the plan. And I think that's going to be reflected in the coming up election as well. I think a lot of people have actually looked at the role of New South Wales and why they haven't complied with some, particularly some of the water management plans, but other issues as well. And in my view, I think that's been deliberate to just really ignore the recommendations of the plan and the planning milestones that occur. So that'll all get played out in the Parliament. There's a couple of other things I'd just like to, and I no doubt we'll mention other things a bit later on, that I'd like to mention in terms of the political challenges around water generally, not only in the Murray-Darling Basin system, but it is the threat of coal seam gas on groundwater systems. I think Richard and Stuart, they'd know much more than I would, as others in the room would as well. But we still don't understand the connectivity issues between groundwater systems and river water systems. But we've developed a plan that's based on some degree of knowledge of those systems and the things called end of basin numbers that are placed on stream outflows that go into the plan itself. So what I've been saying for a number of years now, I'm involved now in terms of the Liverpool Plains, the Narrabri coal seam gas project, as to trying to prevent those things from happening until we fully understand the groundwater issues. I'm not just talking about the Great Artesian Basin here. There's a whole 2 hours in that. But the groundwater system in the Namoi catchment, which is part of the Murray-Darling catchment, is the largest in the Murray-Darling Basin system. It is possibly the most known scientifically in terms of how groundwater interacts with surface water and what that means in terms of the inflows, etc. But it is even that, there's very little scientific knowledge of what is actually going on. The Namoi Valley Catchment Committee, when we did have catchment management authorities before they were torn up, and they were torn up for one reason, and that was to stop the catchments themselves being involved in determining the capacity of their catchments to absorb various issues, whether that be irrigation, mining, forestry, or just general habitation. The Namoi Valley people spent $6 million developing a landscape capability assessment process, and that was to make sure that wouldn't happen. The New South Wales government, the current government, changed the rules again and put in place these local land services that are in New South Wales. And those people from New South Wales would understand some of those issues. So there's very real issues out there in terms of the science. And I know Richard will probably talk about a lot of the scientific method that's out there as well. But I think that we should pause some of the actions on water. Floodplain management's another thing that we need to pause on. We need to pause and get the science right before we allow some of these activities to occur, particularly on floodplains where you can have subsidence and other things that are happening as well. And there's glaring examples, the impact on agriculture and our river systems that are coming out of the Darling Downs as we speak. Yeah, they're living that part of the degradation of the system through the collapse of coal seam gas aquifers, the various geological strata that surround them, etc. So it's a big issue. I think we are making progress. I think one of the things that really does need to be factored into this whole thing is the issue of climate change and what that can actually mean in terms of inflows and the impacts on those who actually live and rely on those rivers and groundwater systems. So I've probably gone for my 7 minutes, Mel. If I haven't, asked me a question.
No, thanks, Tony. We will get a chance to come back. We've got a bit of time built into the end. So it's just important, to get your whole message out. So thanks very much for that and for sharing, what you went through back at that time. So we'll cross over to Professor Kingsford.
Yeah.
We'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Mel. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
And first of all, thank you very much, aunties, for your, I want to pay my respects to your history and the importance of that and the length of time that you have experienced and understood this water and country and how much that brings to, you know, our discussions around the health of the rivers. I also would like to acknowledge I'm on Bidjigal country here at the University of New South Wales and pay my respects to elders past and present and leaders emerging. So I guess I've just got a couple of slides about healthy rivers and wetlands and what's needed. I think it's important to understand what our rivers are. Now, if you think about our rivers and the way they used to flood, they used to come down into these large floodplains. Sometimes that water went to another river, like the Macquarie or the Gwydir onto the Barwon Darling. But a lot of the time, these floodplains were very important and healthy parts of it. We've built large dams in the upper catchments, which have given us great benefits in terms of towns and in irrigation in particular, which is the major user of water in the Murray-Darling. But what has actually happened is that those floodplains have shrunk. And so that biodiversity, the areas that were very important culturally, those areas are now much smaller than they used to be. We've also, as Tony said, built lots of levee banks to control where that water goes, particularly in the Darling River and its tributaries. There are many off-river storages and channels across that floodplain, and these have had significant ecological, social, and cultural impacts right across this vast area of the Murray-Darling. Well, I guess what we need to understand is what does this mean? What we do hear quite a bit about balance and the need for balance in the rivers of the Murray-Darling. We need to realise in looking at balance that many of the major wetland systems of biodiversity, where our native fish are, where our river red gums are, often where the most culturally important sites in the Murray-Darling are these very large floodplains that once were very healthy, but are essentially in a lot more trouble than they used to be. And obviously the basin plan was a very important part of trying to restore some of the health of these magnificent systems. And certainly it's done a reasonably good job, particularly the buyback of water. Now you'll notice each of those has a little emblem there called Ramsar, and that essentially means it's a wetland of international significance. And that is particularly important in terms of the basin plan, because this was the critical aspect that allowed the federal government to have oversight because of its international obligations for these international wetlands, and also its international obligations for migratory bird species like migratory wading birds. And of course, it's got national obligations for threatened species. We seem to have lost a lot of that environmental obligation in some of the discussion and debate around the basin plan. I guess what I wanted to do was just think about what sort of happened in the last little while. We've seen these massive fish kills at Menindee in 2019, 2020. There are large areas like that area of River Red Gum in the middle of places that are Ramsar sites, that are protected areas, in other words, they're nature reserves, where the river red gums have died, mainly because they're just not getting enough water. So unfortunately, many of our metrics are still going down. I would like to think we've slowed the rate of decline, but we still have many big challenges in terms of managing this magnificent river system. And I guess I wanted to sort of leave you with, what are the 7 critical things we need in terms of where we're up to now. And most importantly, this is not just an issue about irrigated agriculture versus environment. It suits various lobby groups to argue that. This is actually about getting healthy rivers, which is important for irrigated agriculture. But there are a lot of other stakeholders that care about rivers, many of you on the line tonight. But obviously, First Nations people who looked after the rivers for so long and so well. But we have people who fish in rivers. We have graziers who depend on the floods of our river systems. Some time ago, we did an analysis of who owns most of the floodplains, and they're actually owned by graziers, not by government. And it's those graziers that talk about the transfer of wealth upstream, because essentially they have lost the flooding that they needed to grow their cattle and sheep. Tony talked about the basin plan. We're still 700 gigalitres short of the 21,750 gigalitres that's promised under the basin plan. It's been very problematic with projects like Menindee. We recently did an analysis of the Menindee Lakes efficiency project, or sustainable diversions adjustment limits mechanism, which is SIDLAM, which is a mouthful. But essentially, we identified that the New South Wales Water Agency had largely made up its mind and was going to go through a sham of consultation. It ignored a whole lot of scientific information because it didn't suit its narrative in terms of drying up some of those Menindee lakes and essentially meeting its obligations for putting more environmental water into the river. So essentially, it was robbing one environment of its water to give to another. A real case of robbing Peter to pay Paul. I mean, I think importantly for the future, there's a need to think about flow targets and getting the information we need that say, what sort of flows do we need in our rivers to keep them with water over time? We've heard a lot in the last little time about how rivers like the Darling dried up. And actually the science doesn't show that. Many parts of the Darling have always had some flows, except most recently in that 2019, 2020. And I was part of the Academy of Science expert panel, and we quite clearly identified that it was a result of over-allocation upstream. So thinking about what flow targets we could have and how we link those to environmental targets is really important. And that could also be related to water access. One of the things that most people don't understand is that most of the things we care about in terms of the basin plan and the environment are not well linked to our water resource plans or water sharing plans. The fourth one, Tony talked about, we do need to fix floodplain harvesting. And this is an issue for New South Wales primarily, but also for Queensland. Compliance and auditing, and understanding that the diversions that governments and industry agreed to in terms of the Murray-Darling Basin cap at 93, 94 levels of development should be kept. And we need to think about that, not just through the prism of modelling, but how do we use real data to understand what might have been there in those days, in those years. Then, of course, we've got many fragmented floodplains, and the aunties talked about the Mihai and also the Guida River, highly fragmented. We have cotton irrigation right along the banks of many of those floodplains. But in some places, we can't get the environmental flow out to the floodplains because there are constraints of flooding land and possible people saying that they will sue if that environmental flow owned by government actually goes onto their land. And of course, there are many illegal structures still on these floodplains. we need to get some transparency in this business. We need to know what's happening in terms of the amount of diversions and what goes to floodplain harvesting, regulated licenses like general security and high security, so that we know not only what's being diverted, but what's actually in the rivers as well. We've seen a bit of policy creep in terms of the way the New South Wales government has interpreted some of the legislation around management of rivers. So one of my big concerns is that, as well as we've been putting water back into the river, we've been watching while loopholes have been allowed more water to go out for water resource development. And finally, just linking that accountability for environmental responsibilities. We do have these responsibilities for Ramsar and for biodiversity, and the states in particular like to think about, you know, meeting South Australia's environmental targets, forgetting that Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria have responsibilities for their own environments in their own states. And they largely have ignored that in terms of their interpretation of the Basin Plan. There is a great opportunity to say, what do we need in the environments of our rivers, and then make sure that we've got enough water to make sure those environments are sustainable. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you, Richard. You've covered that all off beautifully. Thanks very much. Stuart, I thought we'd throw to you for just a couple of minutes, and thank you for making time so that the aunties could have more time. What happens if we build new dams in a cap system? Does that make new water?
Thanks, Mel. Yes, I'll be very quick. And like Richard, I'm also coming from Bidjigal country at the University of New South Wales. So to answer your question, no. And to many people, that's quite obvious. Building dams doesn't create new water. But as obvious as that may be, many people seem to miss that point. When you have a capped system like the Murray-Darling Basin, it's a fully allocated system. We're trying to claw water back from those allocations. There's no opportunity to create new allocations from dams. So when we build a new dam in an allocated system like that, we can make changes. We can change who has access to that water, and we can change when they have access to that water. But ultimately, we're not creating new water. We're not putting new water into that system. So that's a very important point to understand about storage and about dams. The second point is perhaps less obvious, and that is that when you increase storage, say, for example, I'm going to talk about Tamworth, and say if you increase drinking water storage upstream of Tamworth, increasing the storage itself doesn't necessarily make that city more drought resilient, and it doesn't make more water available for that city. So if you look at Tamworth during the Millennium Drought, they almost ran out of water in about 2006. And as a consequence, there was a plan to increase the storage in Chaffey Dam, the big dam that Tamworth has a drinking water allocation from. It used to be 62,000 megalitres. In about 2015-16, we raised the wall to create more storage there, up to 100,000 megalitres. And when you look at how that was described by the New South Wales Parliament, by the Commonwealth Parliament, it was all about making Tamworth more water resilient and ensuring that Tamworth is not going to run short of water in the next drought. And in fact, the Commonwealth government taxpayers funded a big chunk of that dam. The state government taxpayers funded most of it, but about $4 million actually came from the ratepayers of Tamworth as well. And they're paying annual license fees to reimburse the state contribution of about $1 million from the ratepayers, from Tamworth City Council. But in fact, what happened was that we raised the wall up to 100 gigalitres of storage. Then we had another drought in 2017 to 2020. And very quickly, that water dropped back down again, and Tamworth was back in severe drought conditions, and they were all on level 5 water restrictions, no outdoor watering of gardens. So what went wrong there? What went wrong was that by raising the wall, all you're really doing is you're increasing the water that is going to be available for general security irrigation allocations. So that water gets drawn down very quickly, because that's the point of having storage for irrigation, is you draw it down during a drought. And so it gets drawn down, and there's only 14 gigalitres at the very bottom of that 100 gigalitres that is actually a drought reserve for Tamworth. So the storage comes right down over about 2 years, 2017, 2018, and it's only when you start to approach that bottom 14 gigalitres that it stops. And that water is sitting there for Tamworth. But by that time, Tamworth is in severe water shortage and in severe danger of running out of water, and therefore on level 5 restrictions. So the key point there is that we don't solve these problems simply through engineering and through infrastructure. By raising the wall on Chaffey Dam and claiming that that will improve water security for Tamworth, we're quite wrong in doing that. The only way to improve the water security for Tamworth in this circumstance would be to increase the amount at the bottom of the dam that we reserve for drought security for Tamworth. So from 14 gigalitres up to a larger number. And that's not an infrastructure solution. That's changing the water sharing plan. That's a solution on paper that needs to be made. And I think it's very important that after this election, whichever side of government, whichever side of politics wins government, that the new water minister, the way that we start to think about water really takes that into account. And if we're going to look at water security for towns and cities, we need to be looking at the impact of the water sharing plans, not just trying to build our way out of a drought. Thanks.
Well done. Thanks, Stuart, for that. I'm sure all of our valleys could sell a very similar story. Certainly here in the Wamble Macquarie, we've got a massive dam, and the settings are that it will empty every 2 years, regardless of the outlook and the climate, which is absolutely terrifying. Thank you for that. Now, Polly, I just wanted to revisit Auntie Polly. Do you have any more at this stage you want to say about, people who are downstream looking up?
The mob downstream and even the mob upstream, what we've been seeing is a lot of construction work that's going on, and it's on our roadways, which are artificial, I believe, levee banks, and are stopping water crossing over, especially out at our the wash pool. It's just out here, and the wash pool is the Mia. That's our women's site that they've never ever recognised, and it's a natural spring that comes up there, but it's all been changed now. So now that it's flooded, we can't get across there at this stage. But we've never ever been consulted on that, on those issues that affect us here with the river. But one of the things that I did notice with the last flood last year, that the water finally got right through all the way down south. And I think that it was a glorious, beautiful thing to see, even right down to South Australia. So, everyone that helped with the Stop Them mob in New South Wales, thank you very much, and the mob up this way, they haven't stopped fishing, which is wonderful to see. Everyone's smiling and happy about catching fish. But, we still have to watch these mob, because like the aunties were saying, as soon as that flood come here, the water disappeared. And we know that it didn't get down that quick to Walgett or Collie. It disappeared before it got down there, before it disappeared here. Yeah. We're wondering what's going on with all this water, even now, You see water come, you will see water go. So you don't know. You don't know when to go swimming or not, You don't know what's going on with the waterways. And we've got no say in them. But like you said, the people up north, we're finally getting to have a say with what's going on. And, the irrigators, they're relentless. We've just had someone else here charged with, $350,000 fine, which is pittance of what they've done. And that's just outside here, Moree, out of Binnyguy. So, it just non-stop. But I know that the Murrays all along, the riverways and all the way down, you know, that they were feeling good, actually seeing some more water. I know it was a lot of water, but I think that, you know, it was a blessing, I
Yeah,
believe. And I
I-
think we need some more of it.
yeah, I agree. It took three floods to fill the dams and then finally fill the rivers, and it's
Yes.
been spectacular. It really has been.
Yeah.
Um,
Jude, did you want to say?
I wanted to ask Stuart a question.
Stuart, I wanted to ask you a question.
Sure. Great.
You're talking about the dams, right? We've got
Yes.
a big one not far from us sitting at Inverell. And what's gonna happen to that, to us, if that happens to burst? We'll be gone off the face of the earth, won't we?
So dam safety is another but very important issue, and it is,
That's why I'm bringing it up.
yeah.
We're at
So
the
it's essential
receiving
that,
end of it.
There's still not enough.
yeah. So we do have stringent dam safety regulations in New South Wales, which is something that we are fortunate for, but it's something that we can't take our eye off the ball, and we need to make sure that we uphold all of those dam safety regulations to ensure that we keep communities safe downstream.
I know we need the dams, sorry for interrupting you. I know we need the dams, but to survive, but we still got to survive without all that water hitting us. You understand where I'm coming from?
I agree, and it's very important, and it's something that should be transparent, and information should be available for people to understand what the risks are, and how those risks are being managed.
It's a big one too, isn't it, that dam?
Yeah. Copeton's a very big dam, and especially with climate change bringing bigger floods, certainly dam, you know, the economics of keeping dams structurally sound is becoming an issue as well.
That's a good point.
Yeah, we have some politicians on the line who have got all the answers and have heard all the problems, and I'm sure they're just waiting to let us know what they think can be done. Elizabeth, can I call on you? Hi, Elizabeth. How are you? Now you are on mute. Can you take yourself off? And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks.
Sorry. Look, hello, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on, which is the Darug people of the Eora Nation in Haberfield here, where I'm about to have to go and leave you all, I'm sorry, and be part of a heritage conversation, which I accepted before being invited to this. But I would just like to say hello, and also to say I'm pretty sure I don't have the answers to all of this. I think it's extraordinarily complicated. But so I'm standing for the upper house, and one of the interesting things about engagement with the upper house, although I don't think this is particularly the way it's worked up to this point, is that it enables sort of these big picture conversations like across the city and the country and different parts of city and countryside. We did a couple of months ago, fairly near the start of our campaign, we launched a water policy, which was actually subtitled Floods, Droughts and Heat Waves, because of the influence, obviously, of climate change on all of this. And we had a number of key actions, which I would like to run you through, but with the proviso that I think my purpose here is at least half to listen to people as to say what we think. I would not put myself up as an expert, but I do think that there are things that can be done. One of them, for example, we would like to see a proper scientific map of the state, identifying not just, you know, water flows and things, which are in some places underground. And sorry, thank you very much. I'll be a few minutes, just thank you. But also soils and fertility and forests and habitat. I was at a meeting this afternoon about koalas and that, what's happening in the state across that. So there's a whole lot of interesting issues, which I think need to be understood holistically, including, of course, where the aquifers sit beneath and how the groundwater flows. Then there are some, I think there are some fairly obvious things that we need to do, like not building on floodplains, not allowing, certainly not encouraging building on floodplains, but not even, I mean, I think just simply stopping it is probably the answer to that, but certainly at least having a moratorium until we understand how that can be done, if it should be done at all. I think a lot of the rest of what we've talked about is about, in general terms, sort of keeping rainwater where it falls. And I'd be interested, you know, which is obviously has, I suppose, an effect on the river systems, which eventually collect some of that water. And I would be interested to know what people think about the extent to which that's, you know, things like slow water projects on farmland, which obviously helps hydrate the soil and has a whole lot of spin-off benefits for the fertility of the land, and also for the carbon content of the soil, which in turn enhances dramatically, like multiplies it by eight times for every 300 millimeters of carbon depth, I believe, the water holding capacity of the soil. So that's an enormous thing. And I'm curious to know whether that has any bad effects, I suppose, on the water flow systems. I am going to have to go, but I'm really sorry about that, double booked. But also to end, or at least not to allow any fracking of anywhere in New South Wales, in my view. I think we should be totally ending our addiction to fossil fuels, and the idea of fracking, in particular, the Liverpool Plains and also the Narrabri for coal seam gas, in order to supply overseas markets, which are already organized to keep prices here high, is madness, when we should be actually moving in the opposite direction. Improving stormwater management and runoff control systems in the city and in the countryside, with improved rainwater storage, you know, big tanks in city situations above 10,000 litres, and in farm situations probably above 100,000 litres, encouraging farmers to cover dams to reduce evaporation and to plant microforests. Also in the city, I think microforests, I was looking at one up in Dungog last night, actually. But the Maiawaki microforest idea, I think, is very promising in terms of enhancing water holding and increasing rainfall and hydration. And then also not raising the Warragamba dam wall. I think that's a fundamental principle, and instead undertaking solar powered seawater desalination projects, and everywhere in the state, purified water recycling schemes, which also should be solar powered. So that's a kind of a very quick canter through our very broad set of policies. And I am being summoned, so I will have to go. I do apologize. And I would love to hear if there are comments, doubts, amendments that should be made to all that, then I would love to hear it. But I will have to, if I may, watch the recording of this rest of this session. I'm going to have to run. But thank you so much for having me, and lovely to meet everybody insofar as I did meet you guys. But thanks, and lovely to see you, Mel.
Thank
Appreciate
you. Thanks for squeezing us in.
Au revoir.
Yeah, bit of a timing issue there, but Kate, can we hear your thoughts on what we've been talking about and the connected basin?
Yes, for sure. Thanks, Mel. And hi, everybody. How exciting that there are so many people tuned in to this meeting. It's really, really exciting to see. Firstly, I'd like to begin as well by acknowledging that I am tuning in from Gadigal land in Redfern in Sydney, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. And thank you so much, aunties, for that incredible contribution to the conversation, to your stories, and most importantly, what you have told us in terms of why cultural rights, First Nations rights to water is so important, which the Greens have been working on, which I'll talk a little bit about tonight. So I've held the water portfolio for the Greens as an upper house MP for the past 4 years. And just during that short time, because it is when it comes to the tumultuous history of water politics in this country, I have been pretty shocked, frankly, in those 4 years by what I've seen. This time 4 years ago, ahead of the last state election, of course, we witnessed the third devastating fish kill at the Menindee Lakes. A scientific panel convened by the Academy of Sciences placed the blame squarely on poor water management and excessive water extraction in the Northern Basin. So the panel chair, Professor Moritz, warned that unless urgent steps were taken to restore flows, the Darling will die. Instead of acting to avert further ecological disaster, the Liberal National Government, which had just been newly elected for the third term, pushed ahead with plans to hand out $1 billion or more in floodplain harvesting entitlements and build unnecessary and expensive massive dams. So essentially now here we are, 12 years have been wasted. And it'll come as no surprise to most people tuning in that I believe that voting out the Liberal Nationals on the 25th of March is the first step to restoring the basin's health. But we must go further than that. We must undo the New South Wales government's disastrous floodplain harvesting policy. That means, as we know, 300 gigalitres, if not more, of floodplain harvesting entitlements have been given to irrigators, big irrigators in the Northern Basin for free. The government is exceeding the legal limit of 64 gigalitres in the basin plan by adjusting the sustainable diversion limits in a process that the Upper House inquiry into floodplain harvesting, which I chaired, and Rose Jackson, who's on in a sec, was also on, found was potentially unlawful. The Greens stand with downstream and First Nations communities in wanting to see floodplain harvesting brought back to 64 gigalitres, and illegal structures or structures that disrupt natural flows must be decommissioned. And I commit tonight to disallowing these floodplain harvesting regulations once again when the new parliament resumes. So the government thinks that they have gotten away with it because of the election, but no, the powers of the upper house mean that we can do that. In the first week, I can introduce a motion and we can be back there. So happy to discuss that with some of you later, because we cannot let them get away with handing out what they've handed out. We can't just sit back and let it happen. And I think the upper house has an enormous role to play there. So what's happened since the ICAC investigated water management in New South Wales as well, and found that New South Wales government's management of water was unduly focused on irrigator interests and that they failed to give effect to the objects, principles and duties of the Water Management Act? Nothing has happened. The revolving door between the irrigation industry and the National Party controlled Water Ministry and their office is still wide open. And the Water Management Act's principles still aren't being given effect. So we need to ban political donations from agricultural corporations, and we need stricter measures to slow the revolving door between government and industry. The Greens will extend the cooling off period between holding public office and working in an industry which that office regulates to cover all senior public servants and ministerial staff, because it's really important we get rid of the influence of big irrigators on our water politics, if you like, because that's really the nub of the problem. So we'll ensure that all the recommendations of the ICAC report are fully implemented. Most importantly, I think we need, and we announced this today as part of our Murray-Darling Basin plan, the Greens plan, not the plan, that we need a standalone, well-resourced Department of Climate, Environment and Water again in New South Wales. So water management decisions must be made in the interests of the environment and all communities, not just those with the deepest pockets. The Greens also want to see improved rules to protect low and environmental flows. Of course, we need downstream flow targets that protect the lower Darling and ensure the Menindee Lakes reaches 400 gigalitres after a prolonged dry period. We also need to reverse this government's incomprehensible decision to exclude the most recent drought data of 2 droughts from being used for annual water determinations. The latest climate modelling by the CSIRO indicates that water availability in the Murray-Darling Basin could decrease by as much as 40% within the next 3 decades. So we need to use the best available climate projections to make rational decisions about how much water is left to go around and amend the limits for each valley to reflect that. And I note that Tony Windsor talked about pausing everything. Maybe that's what we do, to take account of the science now, the latest science. So since colonisation, governments have also ignored the inherent rights of First Nations peoples to protect, manage and own water resources on their traditional country. Consultation with First Nations peoples needs to be culturally appropriate and meaningful. This means actually influencing outcomes rather than another departmental ticker box exercise. So within the New South Wales Water Management Act, it actually recognises the significance of water for Aboriginal people and aims to protect features of Aboriginal significance, but it goes nowhere near far enough. It doesn't really have any effect. It's done little to give First Nations people access to water, like access to physical water, let alone to protect the waterways they're so spiritually and culturally connected to. The Act must be amended to prioritise First Nations voices in water management and acknowledge their rights to and custodianship of water, and ultimately share decision-making power with the traditional owners of the Murray-Darling Basin. Cultural flows are important to the management of the basin, but we also need to provide genuine water entitlements to traditional owners for free with no strings attached. Until we do, we continue to undermine their right to have custodianship of their water and manage country. And I'll just finish by saying this, that the Greens will be making that cultural water entitlements part of a treaty making process that we have committed to. We are running in the upper house. We have a good chance of getting 3 elected. I'm the first candidate. There's a young regional doctor, Dr. Amanda Conn, who is second, and third on our ticket for the upper house is Linda Junko, a proud Wiradjuri and Badoo Island woman who has committed to beginning a process with First Nations people in terms of treaty, truth and treaty, and in that will be cultural rights, First Nations rights to water. I think that's incredibly exciting, and regardless, the Greens after the next election are probably guaranteed afterwards we'll have 4 Greens MPs, hopefully 5 in the upper house, all Greens women, and you can be guaranteed that water management, sustainable water management, holding the government to account will be one of my top priorities, as it has been for quite a few years with Greens MPs in the upper house. Thank you. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks for your tireless work with those inquiries. It's meant a lot to the community for us to be heard. There's serious issues like these dam projects and floodplain harvesting really are a threat to our existence out here. So thank you for that. And also another very tireless worker on these committees has been Rose Jackson, Shadow Water Minister. Can you talk us through what you'd like to see for rivers after the next election, Rose?
Hey, thanks, Mel. I mean, I probably can't because it's already quite a bit behind time. And I guess I do want to leave time for people who have taken some time out of their night to join online, to have the opportunity to have their say and feedback. So I'm feeling a little bit time constrained right at the end. But I guess I would just say I'm zooming in tonight from Bundjalung country. I'm actually up in Ballina on the Northern Rivers. I'm as part of the campaign. And, you know, these are communities that have been particularly badly impacted by our mismanagement of water. I mean, a lot of the things that I think are concerns about water management in New South Wales have been highlighted by the speakers. I want to thank Richard and Stuart for all of their work. You know, I have really enjoyed collaborating with you guys, and, you know, your feedback has been really valuable. Labor supports the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. We support its implementation in full, and you know, I think that people can see the difference that the election of a federal Labor government has made in terms of the dedication of governments to actually implementing that plan. I think, as previous speakers have highlighted, the New South Wales government, supported in a full-throated way by the previous federal government, have spent almost a decade systematically undermining the Murray-Darling Basin Plan and trying to find ways to avoid meeting their legally binding obligations under the plan. And they have made no progress on commitments that they have given. They have deliberately tried to frustrate its implementation. And now, with the reconciliation due in 2024, we're behind, we're off track. They haven't done the work. They've never wanted to do the work. They haven't even done the preliminary work on the work that has needed to be done. You know, as previous speakers have mentioned, they have deliberately ignored community feedback and the best available science on what they needed to do. And so that has left us in a really perilous state. New South Wales is an embarrassment to the other basin states. We're the only state that doesn't have accredited water resource plans. The plans that have been submitted previously have been rejected by the Murray-Darling Basin Authority as inadequate. So the record of the current New South Wales government, I think, is atrocious, and it doesn't surprise me that they haven't even bothered to show up. I mean, it's nice that they sent their apologies, but to be perfectly honest, it's not good enough. You know, they have spent 12 years undermining the Murray-Darling Basin Plan and, you know, undermining the legally binding commitments of this state, and then they weren't even prepared to show up, any of them, to an online forum to defend their record. So I think that speaks volumes about their commitment to sustainable water practices in New South Wales. You know, Labor, as I said, our commitments are pretty clear. We support the plan. We support its implementation. We accept all of the reservations that people have about the projects the New South Wales government has pursued, its approach to floodplain harvesting. We've been happy to support disallowances on the regulations that have been put forward because they did not meet New South Wales's obligations under the plan. So, you know, we continue to raise all of those concerns and, you know, indicate our support. And I think, as I said, the role that the Federal Minister, Tanya Plibersek, has played since she has been elected is indicative of the approach that a Labor government would take. So, I mean, I'm happy to leave it there. You know, we have said a lot about the dam projects. You know, we think that they are serious questions over them as well. And I've made a number of public comments, you know, highlighting the criticisms of those dam projects, everyone from the Productivity Commission to local communities to environmental groups has raised reservations about those projects, and you know, we share all of those. So yeah, I mean, I'll probably just leave it there, but just to say that, you know, we think that the New South Wales government's record on water management speaks for itself. They have let our community down, they have let our state down, they have let regional communities down. Too many regional communities don't even have access to safe drinking water because of their failure. I mean, I'm not even going to go into that, but whether it's, you know, Walgett or Wilcannia, you know, or so many communities, you know, who can't even access safe drinking water, you know, let alone the environmental catastrophe that their water management has led to. People, you know, are drinking water that has, you know, far too high sodium levels in it, is discoloured, tastes off. So, you know, it's absolutely unacceptable. And yeah, Labor's commitment is clear that we are pretty interested in doing water policy in a very different way in New South Wales if we're elected.
Thanks, Rose, and thanks for bringing up that really important issue of drinking water. Again, if the audience, if you've got questions for our current Water Minister, we'll just pop his email address in the chat. Like I say, he was an apology, so I'm sure that he really wanted to be here and would love to hear all those questions. Well, I won't speak for him and assume that he wanted to be here, but I'll assume that he really wants to know all our questions. So yeah, please copy that email address and share some of your concerns that you might have after hearing all these reports. Yeah, so just in the last couple of minutes, we don't have to spread this out too far. We'll just touch base on a few things that have come up. One of them is we've talked about climate change, and we know that Basin Plan 1 doesn't even start to address climate change, and we've still got a long way to go on Basin Plan 1, and the deadline is next year. So when we're thinking about the impact of climate change on this big, beautiful basin, Professor Kingsford or Khan, the climate change data that was in the regional water strategies was quite concerning. Have you got any comments, Richard, on what we can expect to see out here should that what do you feel about that worst case scenario that they presented, it didn't feel really like the worst case scenario, perhaps.
Look, I think you don't really need many models to know what's going on. We're getting much more intense rainfall events and longer and more severe droughts. But look, I think the models are generally indicating the south east of the continent and the southwest of the continent are getting drier. And I guess what that actually means is there's going to be less water, less rainfall, less water in our dams. One of the real concerns that the basin plan never really addressed, even though it was identified by CSIRO in its modelling, was that planned environmental water, in other words, the water that's used to run the rivers, is actually going to be more affected than the water that's in the dams. So that means that the environmental impacts of climate change are going to be larger than they are going to be on the irrigation industry. That's not to say that they're not going to be significant on the irrigation industry. So there are some really big issues for the Basin Plan 2.0 to deal with in terms of how it shares the pain of a drying climate, which is what we're looking at.
Yeah. Thanks, Professor Stewart. Have you got any climate change comments?
Yeah, only to emphasise the point that we know that climate change will impact the amount of water that will be available in various parts of the basin, but that it's complicated. There'll be different impacts in different regions. But as Richard suggested, when the Murray-Darling Basin Plan was first drawn up, there is no mechanism in there to make those adjustments going into the future. So if we think that where we are now is a set and forget Murray-Darling Basin Plan, we have to acknowledge that what that actually means is less and less water in some parts of the basin being available over the decades, over the centuries going into the future. So there is a need to revisit that question and think about how do we keep pace with climate change? What adjustments need to be made? How can they be made? And in fact, there is a big series of reports currently being developed by the Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering, which is looking at this from a number of different perspectives, from irrigation perspectives, Indigenous perspectives, social perspectives, water quality perspectives. I'm involved in putting together that report, and being involved in that has really opened my eyes to just how complex it is, how many knock-on effects there are that will have to be addressed as a consequence of changing water availability.
Yeah, all of those little veins are connected to each other. I did see the General Manager of the Tamworth Regional Council, Tony. He was in the media the other day saying, Tamworth, we're at the end of the system. We can't let any water go past our door. Now, Tamworth is, I don't know, I won't be able to point here because it's weird, but Tamworth is right at the very start of one of those little veins. So the thought that that anyone up in the Northern Basin is anywhere near the end of the system is doing all of our heads in. Well, I'll just throw to the aunties and check in on you. Is there anything particular that you want to say to the politicians who are here?
Yeah, thank you very much for, supporting our mob and also supporting our riverways. They are our bloodline. So thank you very much. And one of the things that we are going to be telling our mob is we need to get rid of Adam Marshall out of our electorate. We've had enough of him. The reason why we're in this system, with all this water disappearing, we've got real estate selling water in now, our water, land, water. So wonder they haven't got us standing up there. When does it stop? We've had enough of this. So we will be telling our mob to get rid of him. We need to stop what he's been doing along with his little party of, I don't know what I should call him, but I won't say anything else that it might not be nice. But yeah, hey aunties, they kicking me under to be quiet. But anyway, yeah, we we need to get rid of the National Party and the Liberal parties out of our regions because they have destroyed our riverways. You know, enough's enough of them, I believe too.
Well, the National Party and the Liberals never done anything for us. It was always, most of the time it was Labor that was behind us, not them other lot.
No, we get nothing off them fellas. And you know, like,
And the independents, we didn't get much off them either.
yeah, well, we need people out here to come out here and help us and talk. And thanks, Kate, you know, thank you very much for, you know, what you said, and we'll be here, you know, to help support you, you know, through this election, and also to support our, you know, it's mainly about our bloodline and our connection. And that, Lau?
Yeah, and what I want to say is, really and truly, our Mother Earth is really angry. She is angry, believe me. See all the things that's happening in the world? Our floods, you know, everything that's happening all over the world. She's angry because of what they're doing to the mines and the rivers. They're poisoning out. You know, our people have looked after this land for so many thousands of years. We've never had this problem. Now, she's angry and she's showing it. She's showing how angry she is. And I've taken notice of it. So is a lot of my people. She needs to change. To get back our water. Stop trying to poison our water. We need our water to survive. And that's it. And I believe she's angry. That's why everything's happening all over the world. They're saying the world's going to end soon. I don't know. With everything that happened all over the world, who knows?
Yeah, not much hope up this way, you know, after seeing what's going on in the main street of town, you know, whether you, it's hard to buy, you know, a piece of fruit in the main street, but you can go and buy water. Our water.
Not only the water, you can go and buy guns.
And guns, yeah.
Because
That's what we've got here. We've got a main street full of guns, water and land being sold.
Who'd ever thought we had to buy water? Oh, us. We're going to buy water.
Never mind.
Thank you
We
very
thank you for taking the time to listen to us, you know, and to everyone on the chat. Yama to you all. Lots of love going and blessings out there to you all.
Up by me and bless you all.
Thank you.
you, aunties. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.